into the show right now to talk about exactly that. Manishi, hi, morning. Great to have you on the show. Let's first talk about India, because the next 2 days as the GST meeting kickstarts, Manishi, are going to be extremely critical. The government's intention, of course, is right. We all know that there is going to be rationalization, perhaps 2 slabs that are going to work out. But do you really think that it's going to give a fillip to the domestic demand pretty much across the spectrum?
There are quite a few, and first of all, thank you very much for having me. A very good morning to your viewers. I think there are quite a few factors to consider here. First of all, what percentage of these GST reductions would be passed on to the consumers by the companies, and what proportion would be retained by the companies as kind of a boost to their margins? So that's something we don't know. I think if we go by the previous instances, in a certain portion, it doesn't get passed on. So, so that's one point to ponder. But if we do get a significant part of these GST reliefs getting passed on to the consumers, that I think would be a significant boost to the consumption sentiment. This reduction and rationalization in particular to just 2 slabs, 18% and 5%. And, particularly bringing down quite a few of the discretionary consumption items to a lower slab from 28%. That's a very significant step that the government has articulated. Now it's all up to the GST Council, just to decide what they can actually pass. Because I've seen quite a few commentary that some of the states have been protesting about the potential revenue loss. So, there's a tightrope to walk for the government here.
Manishi, the other thing is that it seems like right now it's a status quo on tariffs. You just heard Trump talk about and give the example of Harley-Davidson. But I think the hint is in what Piyush Goyal, the union minister, said, that they only hope a negotiation and a final one at that by fall or November. So clearly nothing is happening in the next 2 months.
Right. No, absolutely correct. And I think in the near term, Indian manufacturers, particularly in certain sectors, textiles, garments, leather goods, gems and jewelry, they will have to brace for this. I mean, there's no other alternative. What the government can do, apart from giving fillip to domestic demand through these GST cuts, there could also be some degree of targeted stimulus or targeted incentive to these sectors. For example, reducing the import duty on the intermediate goods that these industries import from other sources. Even the RBI potentially can do this by, given maybe lower borrowing costs or relaxing the risk weights that the banks have to bear when lending to these sectors. So there is a range of options that are available to the government, but at least in the near term, there's no real alternative for these sectors other than grinning and bearing it.
The other confusing signal, Manishi, for the markets is the fact that global yields have been surging. And, this despite the Fed pretty much seems to be on course for a Fed rate cut. Pretty much other global central banks are already on to easing. Why exactly is this happening? I mean, what's the market telling us that that's not happening in reality?
Right. Well, the market is clearly signaling that possibly that inflation, despite the fact that headline inflation is down, it is unlikely to remain here for much longer. A significant degree of this inflation whittling down is partly because of the pre-buying of the tariffed goods, which is the front-loading of the purchase of the tariffed goods on the part of the U.S. importers. So when the goods with the additional enhanced tariffs have to be purchased and, the prices passed on to the consumers, that would be the real test of, whether the central bank has been able to win the inflation war. So, one doesn't know what they would do in September. But even with more than 80% probability, which CME FedWatch is indicating for a September rate cut, the market seems to be, sort of marching to a different tune.
Indeed. But Manishi, the other surge that we are seeing is actually the precious metal side. Even gold and silver, they are on the rise. But help us understand, how do you see the money flowing in? Because the safe haven demand continues to be there, but do you believe that the investors will continue to find comfort, or are they still finding comfort in gold and silver at this point in time, and the money will keep trickling in into these asset classes?
Well, we are in a period of heightened geopolitical and geoeconomic tensions, and this is not likely to subside anytime soon. In fact, going by what the U.S. administration, President Trump and the others have been articulating, it seems that, even if you enter into a treaty with the United States, it is not sacrosanct that the terms of this treaty would be adhered to. And you can suddenly have some of the commodities that you're exporting that could come into additional tariffs, and as a consequence, the investment decisions of both individuals and companies get under an exceeding degree of risk, under these circumstances. So that risk, or, the low risk trade or the safe haven trade is likely to be here for the foreseeable time horizon. On top of that, we are also seeing central banks diversifying away from their dollar holdings more into the precious metals. The dollar depreciation itself is a trigger for precious metal upsurge, as we have seen historically. So all these things are actually coming in together. So yes, for the time being, one would have to, keep focusing on this precious metal sector.
Of course, lots to watch out for in terms of global equities and global commodities as well. Appreciate you joining us this morning. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.